There's a moment in life when you realize that staying quiet isn't the same as being peaceful. I learned that the hard way. And by the time I learned it, I was 63 years old, standing in my daughter's kitchen in Wellington, watching a woman I'd never met before tell me, in front of 8 other people, that I'd wasted my life. Let me back up. My name's not important. What matters is that I'm a retired electrician. 37 years in the trade. I started as an apprentice at 16, worked my way up. Eventually ran my own small contracting business for the last 15 of those years. Nothing glamorous. But I put 2 kids through school. Owned my home in Tawa outright. By the time I was 55, and retired at 62 with enough in KiwiSaver and savings to live comfortably without ever asking anyone for anything. I coached junior rugby for 12 years on the side. I volunteered at the local community center every second Saturday. I'm not saying any of that to brag. I'm saying it because when someone tells you that you've wasted your life, the first thing you do is run through the evidence. And the evidence said otherwise. My daughter, I'll call her by her relationship to me, because that's all that matters here. She'd been with her partner for about 2 years when this happened. He's a decent young man, works in IT, mid-30s, sensible. They'd been living together in Wellington for about 18 months. I was happy for her. She seemed happy. That was enough for me. His mother was another matter entirely. I hadn't met her before that Christmas. They'd been together 2 years, and somehow it had never lined up. She lives in Auckland, flies down a couple of times a year, apparently. My daughter had mentioned her in passing, always cautiously. I noticed, though I didn't ask why at the time. Little things. She has strong opinions. She can be a lot. Just don't take anything personally. Looking back, those were warnings I should have paid closer attention to. Her name was Loretta. She had a doctorate in something to do with public policy. She'd worked for the Ministry of Social Development for 20 years, then moved into academia. She was, by all accounts, extremely accomplished. She was also the kind of person who made sure you knew it within about 4 minutes of meeting her. We arrived at my daughter's place on Christmas Eve. Her partner's family was already there. His mother, his older brother, the brother's wife, and 2 small kids, plus my son-in-law's uncle, who was a quiet man and mostly stayed near the food. My wife and I had driven down from Palmerston North. It was a nice evening, warm for December. My daughter had put fairy lights along the back fence. The kids were running around the garden. I introduced myself to Loretta. She shook my hand and immediately looked past me at my wife. Fine. Some people are like that. I didn't think much of it. We sat down for drinks on the deck. Someone asked me what I'd done before I retired. I said I was an electrician, ran my own business. Loretta looked at me with an expression I can only describe as politely confused, the way you might look at someone who's just told you they collect ceramic frogs. Oh, she said. Trades. Just that. One word. With a very particular weight behind it. My wife squeezed my hand under the table. I let it go. Dinner was Christmas Eve. A casual thing. Cold meats and salads. Nothing formal. The conversation moved around. The kids were funny and loud. My daughter was glowing. Her partner was attentive. Kept checking on everyone. I liked him. I still like him. Somewhere around the second glass of wine, Loretta asked me whether I'd found retirement difficult. I said not particularly. I kept busy. I was renovating the sleep-out at our property. I'd been doing some voluntary electrical inspections for a couple of community groups in Palmerston North, but don't you find it? She paused, tilted her head. I suppose the question is, do you feel like you made the most of your potential? Trades are so transactional, aren't they? You do the work, you get paid, you go home. There's no real legacy. I remember the exact feeling I had in that moment. It wasn't anger, not straight away. It was more like the floor had shifted slightly, like I'd misheard. "Sorry," I said. "Well, I only mean," and she gestured vaguely with her wineglass. "A career like that, it doesn't really leave anything behind, does it? Compared to research or policy work or medicine. Nobody remembers the electrician who wired their house." There was a silence at the table that I don't think I'll ever forget. My daughter was looking at her plate. Her partner was looking at his mother, with an expression I couldn't quite read. The brother was very interested in his salad. The uncle near the food hadn't moved. My wife said nothing. Later, she told me she was waiting to see what I'd do. I took a breath. I looked at Loretta directly. "I wired a lot of houses," I said. "And a lot of schools. And a medical center in Fielding that's been running for 20 years. The people in those buildings are warm and safe, and the lights come on when they flick the switch. I think that's a legacy. I think it's quite a good one." She smiled at me. It wasn't a warm smile. "Of course," she said. "Of course it is." The way she said it was worse than anything else she could have said. My daughter looked up at me then, and for just a second I saw something in her face that I didn't understand. Not gratitude exactly. Something more complicated than that. The evening continued. Loretta held court, mostly. She talked about her research. She talked about a conference she was going to in Amsterdam in March. She talked about a paper she'd had published. She was clearly very intelligent. She was also clearly accustomed to being the most impressive person in any room she entered. And she arranged conversations to make sure that remained true. I'm 63 years old. I've met people like this before. I know how to sit quietly and wait. I know how to let things pass. But then, and this is the part I keep coming back to, my daughter laughed at one of Loretta's jokes. It was a small laugh. A polite laugh, maybe. But the joke was at my expense. Something about the practical minds amongst us. And my daughter laughed. I didn't say anything. We went to bed reasonably early. My wife and I had the spare room. She asked me how I was doing. I said I was fine. She said she didn't believe me. I said I wasn't sure yet. Christmas Day was more formal. A proper sit-down lunch. Turkey. Pavlova. The full thing. My daughter had clearly put a lot of work into it. And it showed. The conversation was fine for most of the meal. The kids were a good buffer. People were talking about summer plans, about rugby, about whether the government was doing anything sensible with the housing crisis. Then someone, the brother's wife, I think, trying to be friendly, asked me if I'd ever considered doing something different, a different career path. Before I could answer, Loretta said, "I think at a certain point, it's not really a question people ask themselves, is it? Some paths are chosen quite early, and then she shrugged. That's just what it is." I put my fork down. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "Oh, nothing critical," she said pleasantly. "Just that some careers require a great deal of intellectual investment and ongoing development, and others are more settled, I suppose, from quite a young age. There's nothing wrong with that. You're saying I didn't think much," I said. "I'm saying the work didn't require it." And there it was. Clean and clear, and out in the open. I looked down the table at my daughter. She was looking at Loretta, not at me. "Mum," she said. Not to me, to Loretta. She called her Mum. They'd been together 2 years. My daughter was calling this woman Mum. That's when I understood the shape of things. I looked at my wife. She was very still. I looked at my daughter's partner. He was looking at the tablecloth. I said, quietly, "I think I need some air." I excused myself and went outside. I stood on the deck for a while, looking out at the harbor. It was a blue, perfect Wellington day. The wind had dropped, which in Wellington is a small miracle. My wife came out a few minutes later and stood beside me. She didn't say anything. She just stood there. After 38 years of marriage, sometimes that's exactly what you need. About 10 minutes later, my daughter came out. She looked flushed. She said, "Dad, don't be sensitive. She's like that with everyone. She doesn't mean anything by it." I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I said, "She told me my career was thoughtless. She said I had no legacy. She said I was settled early, and that was just what it was. And you laughed at her joke about me. And you called her Mum." My daughter crossed her arms. "You're taking it out of context." "Which part?" She didn't answer that. I said, "I'm not angry, sweetheart. But I'm not going to pretend that what happened in there was acceptable. Because it wasn't. You're going to make this a whole thing, aren't you?" I remember that sentence very clearly. You're going to make this a whole thing. As though having a response to being insulted is the problem. I said, "No, I'm not going to make it a whole thing. But I'm also not going to go back in there and act like nothing happened." There was a long silence. My daughter said, "She has a PhD, Dad. She's just used to a certain level of—" "I know what she has," I said. "I'm asking about what you have. What you're deciding right now." She went back inside. My wife and I stayed on the deck for a while longer. Then I went back in and cleared the plates. Because that's what you do. I helped with the washing up. I played with the grandkids on the lawn. I was polite to Loretta. I was polite to everyone. But something had shifted. Something that doesn't unshift. We drove back to Palmerston North the following morning. My wife and I talked for most of the drive. Not about Loretta, she was almost beside the point by then. We talked about our daughter. About the way she'd looked at me on the deck. About the word Mum. I want to be careful here, because I love my daughter completely, and I know she was in a difficult position. She was trying to keep the peace. She was trying to hold a complicated set of relationships together. I understand that. I genuinely do. But understanding something and being okay with it are two different things. I didn't call her for about 2 weeks after Christmas. That wasn't a dramatic decision. I just needed some time to sit with it. She called me on the 10th of January. She was upset. She said I was being distant. She said it had ruined Christmas for her. I said, "I want to have a real conversation with you. Not about Loretta. About you and me." She was quiet. I said, "I've been your father for 34 years. I've been at every school production, every rugby match, every hard moment you've had. I've never asked you to choose between me and anyone. I'm not asking that now. What I am asking is, whether you think what happened at that table was okay." A long pause. She said, "No, I don't think it was okay." I waited. She said, "I should have said something." I said, "Yes, you should have." Another silence. Then, I didn't know how. And there it was. Not a justification. Not an excuse. Just the truth. She was 34 years old, and she didn't know how to stand up to the woman her partner called Mum. That's a hard thing to hear about your child. Harder in some ways than the original insult. We talked for a long time that afternoon. About boundaries. About what it means to be in a relationship where one partner's family has a very strong gravitational pull. About how silence isn't neutrality. About how when you don't object, you're making a choice as surely as when you do. I didn't demand an apology from Loretta. I didn't need one. I'm 63 years old, and I've long since stopped needing people I'll never respect to tell me they're sorry. What I needed was to know that my daughter saw what had happened and understood it. By the end of that phone call, I think she did. She came up to Palmerston North in February with her partner. Just the two of them. We had a quiet weekend. Her partner apologized to me directly. He said he should have spoken up at the table, that he'd been trying for years to manage his mother, and it had become a habit that was hurting people he cared about. I appreciated that. It took something to say it. My daughter and I went for a walk on the Saturday afternoon, just the two of us, along the river. She said, "I've been thinking about why I laughed, and I think it's because I've spent the last year trying so hard to get her to like me that I've been doing things I'm not proud of." I said, "That's a very honest thing to say." She said, "I've been putting someone else's approval ahead of the people who've always had mine." We walked in silence for a while. I said, "I'm not going anywhere. You know that." She said, "I know." I said, "But next time, say something." She nodded. "Next time I'll say something. Now, I want to say something directly to anyone watching this who might be in a similar position, either as the person who was dismissed or as the partner who stayed quiet. When someone insults the foundation your family was built on, the work, the sacrifice, the years of showing up, silence from the people you love isn't neutral. It's a message. It says, their comfort is worth more than your dignity. That message lands. It stays. If you are the partner in this situation, your loyalty cannot always be comfortable. Sometimes it costs something. Love is demonstrated in the hard moments, not just the easy ones. The person you've chosen to build a life with needs to know that when something matters, you'll say so. Not cruelly. Not at the expense of your relationship with your family, but clearly, with your voice in the room. And if you are a parent who has been on the receiving end of this, your worth is not determined by the opinion of someone who has known you for 2 Christmas holidays. Your legacy is not defined by whether it fits the vocabulary of academia or white-collar achievement. The lights come on when people flick the switch. The buildings are warm and safe. The children you raised know how to work hard and treat people decently. Those things matter. They always will. I'm 63. I have more years behind me than ahead of me, probably. And one thing I know for certain is this. The people who made me feel small were never the ones who actually knew me. The people who knew me never needed to. Loretta is still in the picture. She will probably always be in the picture. I've made my peace with that. I don't need her to like me. I don't need her to revise her opinion. I need my daughter to know who her father is, and I need my daughter to know who she is. I think we're getting there. That's enough for me. That's more than enough. I've had a lot of time to think about that Christmas since it happened. Long drives back up State Highway 1, early mornings in the shed, quiet evenings when my wife's reading, and the house is still. And what I keep coming back to isn't Loretta. It's the sequence of things. The way one choice leads to the next, and eventually, you end up somewhere that could only have been reached by all the steps that came before. Loretta didn't become that person overnight. Nobody does. You become someone who dismisses other people by practicing it over years and being rewarded for it by laughter, by silence, by rooms that rearrange themselves around your comfort. Every time someone laughed at the right moment, every time someone changed the subject instead of pushing back, she was being told that it worked, that it was acceptable, that the people around her valued her approval more than they valued their own integrity. That's not a judgment. That's just how it goes. We teach people how to treat us, and we teach them slowly, and usually, without realizing we're doing it. My daughter had been in that teaching process for about 2 years, and I could see the effects of it in the laugh that wasn't really hers, in the word mum coming out of her mouth toward a woman she'd known for 24 months, in the way she looked at her plate when I needed her to look at me. She wasn't a bad person. She was a person who had been quietly shaped by something she hadn't fully examined yet. That's what I had to sit with, not the insult I'm 63. I've absorbed worse, but the recognition that my daughter was changing in a direction I didn't like, and that she might not even see it happening. The hard thing about that is you can't fix it for them. You can name it, once, clearly, and then you have to let them find their own way to the truth. Push too hard, and you become the problem. Say nothing, and you become complicit. There's a narrow path between those two, and walking it takes more patience than anything else I've ever done in 37 years of trade work. What I know, having come through the other side of it, is this. The quality of a person's character isn't measured in their credentials. It isn't measured in the letters after their name, or the conferences they attend, or the papers they publish. It's measured in how they treat someone who can do nothing for them. Loretta met a retired electrician from Palmerston North and decided, in about 4 minutes, that he wasn't worth her full attention. That tells you everything about Loretta and nothing about me. Resilience isn't about not being hurt. I was hurt. I won't pretend otherwise. Resilience is about knowing the difference between a wound and a verdict. What Loretta said was a wound. It was not a verdict on my life, my work, or my worth. And holding on to that distinction quietly, without needing to prove it to anyone, that's where the real steadiness comes from. My daughter and I are closer now than we were before that Christmas. That might sound strange, but I think the rupture forced a conversation we should have had earlier. She's working out who she is in that relationship, what she's willing to accept, where her voice lives. I can't do that for her, but I can show her, by example, that it's possible to hold your ground without bitterness, to stay connected without shrinking, and to love someone fully while still telling them the truth. That's the only legacy I'm interested in now. Not concrete, not copper wire, just this. That my daughter watched her father be dismissed, refuse to disappear, and come back quieter and steadier than before. And maybe, when she needs it, she remembers that.